When I first purchased My Time at Portia on the Switch in 2019, it quickly became one of my most played games on the console. Given the hundreds of hours I sunk into the game, it was a no-brainer to back My Time at Sandrock when the Kickstarter campaign was announced. One of the benefits of backing the game was getting to play it before it even hit early access. Sadly, due to issues the development team ran into getting the game certified, the game was under an NDA for over a year, outside of a small story demo. Now that the NDA has been lifted and early access is being made available to the general public, it seemed like the perfect time to share my thoughts on what I've played so far. For anyone who isn't familiar with what My Time at Portia is like, the lazy way to describe it is that it's similar to Stardew Valley and Harvest Moon, which isn't entirely accurate. While there are a lot of similarities, such as building up your homestead, fishing, mining, and potentially even getting married, there are also some key differences. Mainly, farming is not your main focus. You can grow vegetables, but your main objective is to complete commissions from the local commerce guild by collecting resources and crafting or building the requested items. A good portion of these resources come from nearby mines, which allows you to collect stone, clay, various ores, and data disks containing ancient technology that has been long forgotten. Mining was one of my favorite aspects in My Time at Portia, as it always felt like a worthwhile use of my time, and that carries over into Sandrock. In fact, the mantra coming from Portia to Sandrock seems to be, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's not to say that there aren't changes. For one, being in a desert means that water is scarce, and to operate many of your machines in this game requires water. Early on, you can either get water by collecting and combining a lot of dew, or buying it from Burgess. Maybe it's just me, but it does seem kinda shady to have one person in charge of the entire town's water supply. Overall, I like the extra resource management, particularly as it's not something you'll get a lot of by osmosis while doing other things, at least early on. I also like that this gives you an incentive not to just have your machines running constantly. In Portia, I had my machines running all the time, even if I didn't need anything from them at the moment. This forces you to be a little bit more strategic when running your workshop. That said, water seems to be a little too scarce early on, but it's also possible that I was just unlucky with RNG while gathering. Speaking of RNG, a machine called a recycler will be your new best friend in the early game. Where Portia had you cutting down trees and breaking up rocks to collect wood and stone for a lot of your crafting, Sandrock has you breaking up various forms of scrap and putting it in your recycler. Each type of scrap has a chance to produce different items. I do like the idea of having to adapt to what the recycler is giving me, but other times you're stuck waiting to get one more of a single item and oh my god, can I just get one more bearing? Another difference from Portia is that the citizens of Sandrock are very serious about their trees, particularly Burgess. The first time I cut down a tree, I was greeted by a cutscene where he tells me that there's a fine for chopping down trees that aren't on my property, and suggests that the townspeople may not be too fond of me if I go around cutting down trees with reckless abandon. I never really experienced this. I even went around chopping down whatever trees I could find, waiting to see if anything happened. Eventually, I did cut one down in front of Burgess, who came over and yelled at me, and I lost 25 relationship points with him. I'm assuming I could lose relationship points with other characters if they saw me, but given that most of them rarely wander away from town, it's hard to argue that it's much of a deterrent. There's also an all-new cast of characters to get to know. Whether you enjoy them more or less than the people of Portia is likely to come down to personal preference. I found the characters largely to be varied and likable. I also thought the character models were much nicer, with more detail than Portia. They still retain the My Time at Portia aesthetic, but more refined. There are fewer people living in Sandrock than Portia, which does make some sense given that Sandrock is a rundown town in an unforgiving desert. This could also tie into the plot of the game. We're not inheriting a relative's workshop this time. We volunteered to come to Sandrock and help make it a place where people would actually want to live. My hope is that as you progress the story, it will bring more and more people to the town, but I haven't seen this in practice yet. One of my personal favorite changes is the way new machines are unlocked. In Portia, you handed over data disks and in a few days, you would receive a random blueprint for a new machine. In Sandrock, you're able to select which machine you want researched. The research also goes quicker in the early game, with most blueprints arriving in your mailbox the next day. Fishing has also been revamped, to arguably mixed results. While fishing may have been a little too lucrative in my time at Portia, it seems that they overcorrected, as most of the fish I've caught so far have been completely worthless. I also just don't enjoy the mechanics. Instead of waiting for a fish to bite and then finding the best time to reel it in, you instead toss bait into a sand pit, hope a fish appears, and then while it's eating the bait, try to launch a net at it to capture it. This would be a fine, if slightly uninteresting, change of pace from the standard river or ocean fishing, but it's the controls that really sapped away the fun for me. When playing with a controller, you use the right analog stick to aim where to throw your bait and the net. The problem is that it's so sensitive that it's difficult to make small adjustments. No matter what settings I changed in-game, the movement felt way too sensitive. That brings me to my biggest gripe with my time at Sandrock, the controls. Yes, it's early access, yes, a lot of this can be fixed, and yes, there's reason to believe it will be given how well my time at Portia plays with a controller, but in its current state, my time at Sandrock's controls aren't great. Some issues just take a little getting used to, others are genuinely frustrating, and sometimes they just don't work at all. Let's take the social menu tab for example. On top of being clunky to navigate with a controller, you flat out cannot exit this menu with a controller. The back button does not work. If you're using a controller, your only option is to navigate to another menu and back out from there. Not game breaking, but still annoying. There's also inconsistency with the controls. On an Xbox controller, the X button is used to perform most actions like talking to people and confirming some choices. Unconventional, but easy enough to get used to, but other times, the A button confirms choices. Another inconsistency comes from the menus for different machines. For your work table and recycler, the first two crafting stations you'll get, the left analog stick acts as a mouse, the right analog stick as the scroll wheel, and the A button as left click. Imagine your surprise then when you get a furnace and moving the left stick up and down cycles through the various items you can make. Left and right adjust how many of an item to make, and the left and right bumpers switch between categories. Either control scheme would be fine, but having to use two vastly different control schemes in nearly identical menus can be frustrating. The only other real problem I have with the game comes from a lack of optimization. I originally ran the game at the highest graphical settings and didn't really experience any issues. One thing I noticed, however, is that it caused my computer to run way too hot. Turning down the graphics settings did help cool it down, but even at medium settings it was running hotter than something like Final Fantasy XIV at max settings. For reference, I'm using an NVIDIA GTX 1070. Obviously this could just be a hardware-software configuration issue, but I'd be remiss if I didn't at least mention what I experienced. Thankfully, that's all the nitpicks I have, and luckily there's nothing that seems insurmountable to fix. Given the current state of Portia, it's hard not to believe most of these things will be addressed sooner or later. If none of them bother you, you're probably good to buy this when early access launches. If they do bother you, it might be worth holding off for now and keeping an eye out for patches that are almost certainly coming. If you find life running a workshop to be too stressful, you could always just quit and spend all your time at the game center while you gamble your life and problems away. So far there are only 2 games available to play. One is a whack-a-mole style game. It's fun enough, it's not too stressful, but also gets you to strategize just a little. The other game is the Adventure Machine, and there's a lot going on here. The look reminds me of the game show Press Your Luck, but it plays a bit more like roulette. A cursor will go around and around over different icons and you place bets on where you think it will land. As you make successful wagers, you'll move across a game board, fighting monsters and collecting prizes. Despite some issues with the controls, I found this oddly enjoyable and will be definitely playing more. As I always like to end on a high note, the last thing I want to talk about is the skill tree. As much as I liked the skill tree from Portia, it had a few issues that made it seem like it was slapped together haphazardly. In Sandrock, you'll gain experience for performing most tasks like crafting, mining, and completing commissions. In addition to increasing your overall level, which provides you with additional health and stamina, you'll also gain experience in one of 4 categories based on the action performed. earn enough experience in a category, and you'll gain a skill point to spend. This means that if you want to improve your combat skills, you'll have to participate in combat. In some ways, it is more restrictive than Porsche's more basic leveling process, but it does help encourage you to do different things every day. Each category also has multiple branching paths, encouraging you to plan ahead. While not all the planned skills have been added to the game yet, so far almost all the skills come across as very helpful. It was difficult to decide which skills to take because they all seemed useful. Overall, I enjoyed my time at Sandrock. I played it for about 2 weeks on the channel, and I had a hard time not playing it between recordings because the gameplay loop of getting commissions, crafting items, and talking to townspeople was so satisfying. While the game is very playable in its current state, it's not too hard to tell that it's still a work in progress. If you don't enjoy farm life sim type games, I don't think this one is going to change your mind. But if you're the type of person who enjoys these games and you're not too turned off by the wonky controls and a lack of polish, you should definitely consider checking out my time at Sandrock. That's going to do it for me. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, consider giving it a like or even subscribing to the channel. Let me know in the comments what you thought of the video and if you're planning to pick up my time at Sandrock. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.